I'm a nurse for the elderly, and despite what some might tell you, it's not actually such a bad gig. Sure, some of the old folks can be a handful at times, and like any job, this one has its stomach-churning moments. But most of them are sweethearts. All it takes is a bit of compassion and patience to break through to them. So yeah, I mostly love this job. I wouldn't give it up if I could help it. The only part one don't like? The occasional confessions from some of the patients. They say people can feel their end creeping closer, and after a few years working this job, I've come to believe it. Some of them have no one else, no family, no friends left, so they air their dirty laundry in front of us nurses. Most of the time, it's pretty tame stuff. Old Gregory cheated on his wife in their 30s. Larry was into hardcore BDSM. Lisa stole from her company for a while. Stuff you wouldn't necessarily expect, but in hindsight, it doesn't shock you. Other times, it borders on disturbing. Jenkins got into a bar fight and bolted, still unsure if the other guy made it. Sasha had an abortion on her own without ever telling her boyfriend she was pregnant. Sierra ditched her family, slipping away in the night to start over, and the missing person posters gnawed at her soul. That kind of thing gets under my skin, but I can at least understand where they're coming from. I can sympathize, even if I don't condone what they did. But then there are the monsters, the ones whose truly atrocious deeds keep me up at night. Julia, the sweetest old lady you'd ever meet, gassed her husband to cash out his life insurance. Freddie helped torch an entire village back in the Vietnam War, reveling in the flames and the screams of the dying. Sally abused her kid growing up, bad enough to cause a slew of developmental issues. Mind you, I haven't been there for all those confessions myself. Us nurses tend to share them. Morbid as it sounds, go ahead and judge if you want, but we don't ask for these burdens to land on our shoulders. We'll seek relief wherever we can find it. Most of the time, it's just innocent gossip. You won't believe what Gus used to do when he was young, but other times, it's tears and quiet sobs in the break room, stone-cold faces, and a heavy atmosphere with not a shred of levity to go around. Such is life in this field. Most of us have learned to live with it. Those who couldn't walked away. I'm in the first camp, and I don't think last night will change my mind. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. You need some context to make sense of this. It all started with Parker, so I should start there too. He's a bitter old man, no way to sugarcoat it. A tough nut to crack, with rage and hatred for everyone and everything simmering just under the surface. He's the type who won't be satisfied until your parade's drenched in rain. He'd been here since before I started, so the other nurses warned me about him from day one. God help you if you have to deal with him, they said. He can ruin your whole week just by opening his mouth. I didn't take them seriously, thinking he couldn't be that bad. Spoiler alert, he was, but not in the ways you'd expect. He didn't get physical like some of the others, no tossing shit-soaked diapers at us. He flung words instead, and he knew how to make them cut deep. Our first run-in happened when I had to check on him and make sure he took his meds. It was a nice evening, and I found old man Parker in his room, lounging in his recliner. He faced the window, back to the door, and didn't even bother turning around when I walked in. "Good evening, Mr. Parker," I greeted. "Hey, fresh meat," he spat back, his voice dripping with spite. I gritted my teeth and tried to stay polite. "My name's Jessica, fresh meat." He cut me off. "You won't last a month, so I won't bother learning your name. Now why are you here, fresh meat?" I told him why, and he pointed at the empty pill bottle on the nightstand beside him, then went back to staring out at the sunset without another word. So I left out that's how the first 3 weeks went. I'd stop by his room for this or that. He'd sling some snide remarks to insult me, and I'd hold my tongue. It was clear he didn't want anyone around, especially me, but I've never been a quitter, and I wasn't about to bow down to some grumpy old jerk with a vendetta against happiness itself. "You still here?" he asked on the 4th week as I passed by to change his bedding. "My God, woman, you're about as smart as you were pretty." He was in his recliner again. Most evenings and nights, that's where you'd find him. During the day, he'd be outside or in the common area, terrorizing anyone he crossed paths with. But come dusk, he'd retreat to his room and stare out the window until he dozed off in that chair. I ignored his jab, approaching the bed with fresh sheets and pillowcases. "What, Did you swallow your tongue? Forget how words work? He kept needling me. I stripped off the old sheet and tossed it on the floor, even though it wasn't all that dirty, to be honest. Now, I don't recommend doing what I did next. Reacting like that was a mistake, I should have thrown in the towel and walked away. But after 2 weeks of daily abuse, I snapped. I flung the fresh sheets haphazardly onto the bed and stormed over to his recliner. Listen here, you shriveled up old bastard. I unloaded on him. I don't know what your problem is, but I don't need this crap in my life. I'm not surprised your family ditched you. With an attitude like that, I'd have dropped you off at this care home the first chance I got too. I hurled insult after insult, digging deep to drag out the nastiest side of me, fully expecting Parker to fire back. But instead, he just sat there and took it. With every venomous word I spat, the corners of his lips crept higher into a satisfied grin. I only stopped when I ran out of breath, and he waited a beat to make sure I was done. What did you say your name was again? He asked. Jessica, I panted. Jessica, he repeated, letting each syllable roll off his tongue. Tell you what, I like you. And that was that. He turned back to the window, and I finished my work in peace. I regretted the outburst for a while, worried it'd come back to bite me and get me fired. But Parker didn't snitch. It was our little secret. Every day after that, he'd grin when he saw me. He still gave me lip, but it was different, more playful. Not meant to wound or drive me off, just a tease. I could handle that without breaking down in tears, so I took it as a win. After a while, I started teasing him back. He'd toss out his insult of the day. I'd fire back with mine, we'd laugh it off, and move on. We built this weird bond and actually started having fun. I looked forward to it. We didn't talk about anything deep. I didn't know the first thing about him, and he didn't know squat about me, but in my eyes, that only added to the charm. Life rolled on, and before I knew it, I'd been working there for years. Rumors about Parker floated around. Everyone had their theories, but I couldn't confirm or deny any of them. The man was still as much a mystery to me as he'd been on day one. Then, about a month ago, things shifted. He made fewer comments, spent more time holed up in his room, isolating himself. Parker had always been pretty self-sufficient for someone his age, but he started needing help with things. I could tell it killed him inside. I didn't mind, that's what I was paid for, but the man had his pride. He refused to see a doctor or get treatment, so we all figured he'd kick the bucket soon. Most folks at the care home were thrilled at the prospect, but I dreaded it, even if I knew better than to try talking him into anything. One evening, before heading home, I checked on him. Parker was in his usual spot in the recliner, drapes pulled aside, window wide open. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, painting it red as night crept in. He didn't acknowledge me until I stopped beside him. Hey, Jessica, he greeted, his voice a low rumble. I nearly went with a hey, fart breath, but the way he said my name, serious for once, stopped me cold. A pit of dread formed in my stomach. Everything all right, Mr. Parker? His lips curled into a faint smile, and a dry, raspy chuckle escaped his throat, but he let my question hang there for a moment. Going home for the night? He asked. Yes. Could you stay just a little longer? Of course. I knew what this meant. Parker felt his time was near, and he wanted someone with him. I leaned in to take his hand, but the old bastard slapped it away. So we stood there in awkward silence, watching the night settle outside. You're the closest thing I've got to a friend, Jessica, he said out of the blue. The closest thing I've got to family. He chuckled again, but it sounded hollow, sad. God, I'm pathetic. I put a hand on his shoulder. This time he didn't sweat it off. I didn't know what to say. Parker wasn't one for mushy speeches, so I went with the blunt truth, figuring he'd appreciate it. In my honest opinion, it's your own damn fault for being such a grumpy old coot. You could have had plenty of friends here. So, any plans tonight? He asked. I shook my head no. Then can I answer your question with a story? Sure. He shifted in the recliner, buying time as he searched for the right words. I'd seen it before. People think they're ready to open up until the moment arrives. With a sigh, he resigned himself to it and started talking. I was born in a small town in the 1940s, right after the Second World War ended. I had an older brother and a father, but I don't remember either of them. The first died of some sickness when he was little, and the second got drafted and died overseas while I was still a baby. That left my mother to raise me alone. We weren't the only ones struggling to get by. Most folks in that town were in the same boat. Life back then was brutal, especially for cut-off places like ours. But I had a decent enough childhood, I guess. My mother did her best, working herself to the bone and skipping meals most nights so I wouldn't go hungry. He paused for a beat, pulling his eyes from the window to meet mine. I could tell digging into the past hurt him, but after a long moment, he looked back out at the dark world and kept going. Despite her efforts, my childhood didn't last long. I had to grow up fast, step up, help around the house, and find work. That wasn't unusual back then. Kids as young as 8 or 9 worked alongside adults. We didn't have a choice. Things like getting an education or waiting until we were grown. Pipe dreams. Lucky for me, I was big for my age. By 10, I was taller and stronger than my 15-year-old pals. I could handle hard labor, and having an extra pair of hands, a second breadwinner, made a huge difference for us. I still remember my first paycheck, he said with a sad smile. A tiny amount, but I was proud. Mother wanted me to spend it on myself, get something nice, but I didn't. I bought a sack of flour for her to bake bread with and used the sack to make myself a new pair of shorts. "I'm so sorry," I stammered. "Yeah, me too," he muttered. Time marched on. I kept working through the years, taking life one day at a time. Trouble was never far off, but I faced it head on. The adults always tried to shortchange me for my work, and other kids regularly ganged up to bully me out of what little I earned. The first time it happened, I came home empty-handed with a broken nose and a busted lip, he said bitterly. 5 of them jumped me. It was a cutthroat world back then. When I was about 13, my mother brought home a new man. I hoped things would turn around. Maybe I'd get a father, a role model, someone to show me how to be a man. I thought life might get easier. How wrong I was, he said. That guy was a drunk and a brute. My mother and I found out the hard way, her sooner than me, but I saw the signs. Food got scarce even though I was still bringing money home. She'd have bruises she tried to hide, and he was always plastered when I got back. One time I came home beat up again by the older kids. I was hopeful for once. I thought he'd go out there and do something about it. And he didn't, I asked hesitantly. Parker huffed. He beat me up too, called me a little shit in his own words. Said it better not happen again. You hear me? He told me. Next time I came home empty-handed, he'd show me real hell. Why didn't you run away or get the authorities involved? Run away where? Parker shot back. The authorities didn't give a damn. He kept taking the abuse for his mother's sake, couldn't leave her alone with that monster. It got worse over time. Soon, the stepfather was taking my money outright, beating her in plain sight. Wasn't long before he started raising his hand to me regularly, Parker said. But it kept her safe, so I took it. The nights he laid into me got more frequent. At first, it was for stepping in, taking her place. Then for not bringing home enough cash. Then for no reason at all. At some point, I couldn't take it anymore. I snapped, he admitted. The other kids stole my money again, and I was terrified to go home that night, scared of what he'd do. So I ran off into the woods, looking for a place to crash. Instead, I found this old well. Old well? I asked, unsure where this was going. Yeah, you know, a hole in the ground for drinking water, he confirmed. It was a rundown thing, long abandoned and falling apart. I nearly tumbled in when I leaned over to peek down. I tossed a pebble in, and it never hit bottom. Then I spat into it and shouted down the shaft. The echo went on forever, way longer than it should have. I stood there, amazed, listening to my own voice bounce back for minutes without fading. It gave me an idea, he said. I didn't like the sound of that. I went back home that night, he continued. Found him beating my mother since I wasn't there. He chased me when he saw me. I led him out of town, into the woods, deeper and deeper between the trees until I heard the faint echo of that while still calling out. I hid nearby and kept quiet, he said. Waited for him to find it. And he did. He heard the echoes of my scream, thought I'd fallen in trying to hide. The bastard laughed about it. His stepfather leaned over the edge, still chuckling. "Did you learn your lesson yet, you little punk?" Parker mimicked him. Little did he know I did, just not the one he wanted. I burst from my hiding spot while he was distracted and charged him. "All it took was one push," he said grimly. One push, and he went over, screaming all the way down. From that day on, his voice joined mine in that well. The authorities poked around for a few days, but no one really cared. "He was just a drunken thug," Parker said. "Everyone figured he got what was coming to him, died in a ditch, or ran off to torment someone else. No one suspected us. Not my mother, too weak to fight back, and me, just a kid in their eyes. No way we could have taken out a grown man. With him gone, life got a little better. I still scraped by, and the other kids still hassled me, but at least I could sleep easy at home. I went to that well every day at first, then every other day, then once a week tops. The screams never stopped day and night. They got quieter, barely a whisper on the wind, but I could still hear them. Didn't it scare you?" "Terrified me," he admitted, "but I also saw the possibilities." That answer chilled me. I thought about calling it a night, cutting his confession short and bolting, but curiosity, damn it, kept me rooted. "Next up were the kids who bullied me," he went on. "Took me a long time to work up the nerve, but enough abuse will drive a sane man to crazy things. The gang was 5 strong, their leader 19, the youngest my age, the rest in between. Starving street rats, Parker called them. Orphans or runaways from homes as bad as mine, forced to fend for themselves. Except they were lazy," he said. "Took the easy way out, stealing, conning, picking on kids like me. The town wasn't thrilled, but they never messed with adults, so folks let it slide. Until they beat me up for the 100th time, and I'd had enough. I just wanted their leader gone," he said. "Thought the group would fall apart without him, but I couldn't split them up. I tried challenging him to a one-on-one fight outside town, but he brought the whole crew, and he was pissed. You could see the bloodlust in his eyes from a mile away. I knew they'd give me hell like never before. So I had no choice, all 5 had to go. I ran, and just like with my stepfather, they chased me into the woods. I hid near the well again. When they got close to check out the echoing voices, I pulled the same trick. I pushed the oldest first," he said, voice flat as stone. "Then, before the others could catch on, I shoved the second oldest too. The rest were smaller. I could handle them. They tried to run, to save their skins, but I couldn't let them. I chased them down, caught the youngest first, tripped him from behind and stomped his knee to break it. Kept going. The next one I grabbed by the shoulders and slammed into a tree head first, snapping his neck. I tackled the last one, got him in a chokehold. He kicked, clawed at my arm, tried to bite me. When he realized he couldn't break free, he started begging, swore he wouldn't say a word about what happened. He pleaded all the way to the well, legs dangling over the edge. The one with the broken neck went next, then the kid with the shattered knee. He dragged himself pretty far by the time I got to him. But I finished it. That night, the well gained 5 more voices. Parker stopped, staring off into the distance. I thought he was giving me a breather to process, or maybe searching for words. I glanced outside too. A tree's silhouette swayed against the starry sky, and a scream echoed after it. "We don't have much time left." "I have to hurry," he whispered. I was paralyzed beside him as he picked up the story again. "The guilt ate me alive," he confessed. "I went to the well every day, fighting the urge to jump in myself. No one missed those kids. I wasn't the only one they tormented, and deep down, everyone was glad they were gone. They were happy to pretend the 5 ran off to pull bigger jobs somewhere else. I was a wreck for years, but I kept telling myself I had to do it, that my life was better now. Lies I half believed, but they got me out of bed." Another tree shook outside. Closer this time, no scream followed, but Parker flinched anyway. Years flew by. People kept leaving that small town, heading to big cities for work. I was one of them. Found this amazing girl and left with her. We took my mother too. The 3 of us got jobs at some factory or another. For a few years, I thought I'd left that town and my awful deeds behind. Until I started hearing screams in the night, voices I knew. Thought I was imagining it at first. Tried to tell myself it was just guilt driving me nuts. Another tree shook, followed by a howl. Let me guess, it was real, I said. Parker nodded. My mother went missing one evening. Never found her. The city cops took it more seriously, but they couldn't turn up a single lead. No witnesses, no suspects, nothing. But I knew exactly where she was, or what was left of her. After a long trip back to my hometown and a trek through the woods, my worst fears came true. Her voice joined the chorus in that well. I broke down right there, cried in that forest alone all night. It was supposed to be me, not her. I went back home, though, for my girlfriend, soon to be my wife. She was pregnant, and we'd have our first kid soon. I wanted a better life for them than I'd had. I'd be there for my child, my wife, make sure they'd be okay. We got married, small affair, few friends, even less family for a proper wedding. Our daughter was born a couple months later. Most beautiful baby girl in the world, he said, a glint in his eyes. Holding her, hearing her cry, it was all I ever wanted. Enough to justify everything I'd done and been through in a heartbeat. Another tree shook outside, and something took shape in the underbrush at the property's edge. I yelped. Parker grabbed my forearm, steadying me as I tried to pull back. We've still got a few minutes, he said calmly. Don't worry, it's not here for you. You're safe. He went on, and I struggled to split my focus between him and whatever was out there. I treasured every moment with my wife and daughter. But you know how it goes, she grew up in a flash. Before I knew it, she was saying her first words, taking her first steps, moments I couldn't have been prouder of as a dad. The thing outside let out a guttural bellow that rattled my bones. I thought dying animal, coyote getting mauled, or a fox in heat. It stepped into the faint light around the care home, and I saw a human face, then another, twisted in pain, fused into a massive head. Then that thing came back, Parker said, pointing at the advancing beast. More cries in the night, more screams I knew. I knew what it wanted, but I couldn't let it take me or my family. It took another step, its neck and torso pulsing into view, muscles crisscrossing randomly, skin stretched tight, dozens of arms jutting out everywhere. Its countless eyes darted around, searching. I knew I had to do something, get rid of it or appease it. And I knew what it wanted. What? I stammered, shaking. People. Bodies. Victims, he said. More of them. I'd opened its appetite, and now it was hungry. If I didn't give it what it wanted, it'd take it itself, rip my world apart. I didn't want to. I tried talking myself out of it until the last second, but I was so pressed for time and sick with worry for my family. He paused. So I went back to that town. I kidnapped someone, he said, his voice cracking into a sob. An older man, lived alone. I knew him, knew he'd been a widower for decades. He knew me. Barely fought back as I tied and gagged him. I expected him to beg like the kids had, to fight me. But the silence, it was worse somehow. Did he know about that thing? I forced out. No, of course not, Parker said. He was just old and frail. Knew he couldn't stop me. Maybe he'd given up on life long ago, like I ended up doing. I don't know. The rest of the monster lumbered into view, advancing toward the open window, so much more of it than I'd imagined. Legs slapped the lawn at odd angles, dragging its bulk along. It felt unreal, like the window was a screen and I was watching some low-budget horror flick with even cheaper effects. That night, I dragged him out of town, through the woods to the well, said a quick prayer for his soul and tipped him over the edge. He went down without a sound. The monster stopped a few feet from the window, craning its head forward. I was useless by then, more a statue than a person. Parker let go of me and tried to stand, failing twice. His old bones were shot, but on the third try, determination got him up, wobbly as he was. I went back to my wife and daughter after that, he said, stepping toward the window. All was fine for a while. Seeing her smile, growing up, having her by my side, it kept the guilt at bay. She was my world, and I'd do anything to keep it from falling apart. The monster shifted. One of its faces pushed to the front, a wide grin replacing its agonized look. The next time the screams came back, I knew what I had to do, knew what the rest of my life would be. Every few years, I'd go back to that cursed town, snatch someone in the dead of night, and toss them into the well. The grin on that face grew, but the others didn't match. They started whispering, voices blending as they got louder. I kept it up until my daughter grew up, until she found a boy she wanted to marry and moved out, until everyone abandoned that town, leaving it an empty shell for the forest to reclaim. I called it a job well done. Thought my daughter was safe, and I could finally let them take me, that I'd atone for all my sins. After Parker finished his tale, a chilling confession of murders and a monstrous entity he'd fed with victims over the years, I was frozen by his side, reeling in shock and fear. He'd admitted to 6 killings in as many minutes, and I was sure there'd be more by the time he was done. Then something outside caught my eye. A tree shook in the distance, followed by a reverberating scream. "We don't have much time left. I have to hurry," Parker whispered. As he continued, a creature emerged from the darkness, a grotesque mass of human faces, arms, and legs, stitched together in agony, advancing toward the window. Its countless eyes locked onto us, and Parker confessed he'd kept it at bay by feeding it more victims, kidnapping people, and tossing them into a well. Now it was here for him. The monster pushed its many arms into the room, grasping at the air as it reached for him. "What happened to her?" I asked, my voice trembling, referring to his daughter. "What do you think happened, Jessica?" he replied somberly. "What do you think pushed me to run for the rest of my life? Made me wary of getting close to anyone." I held back my answer, but I had one more question. "Why tell me all this?" Parker smirked, that same mischievous grin I'd grown used to. "'Cause I'm a selfish old bastard," he said matter-of-factly. "I wanted at least one person to know, and maybe miss me. Now you do." He stepped within the monster's reach, and it seized his arm with 100 fingers. Its eyes shifted past him, locking onto me. "Thank you, Jessica," he said, his back to me. "You can leave now. That'd be best." I didn't argue. I backed toward the door, my head spinning, legs wobbly like unsteady stilts. But I made it, slipped into the corridor, and closed the door gently. Parker watched me the whole time, a peaceful smile on his lips until the latch clicked. The rest of the night was a blur. I stumbled to the break room, tears streaming down my face. I didn't even realize I was crying until a tear fell on the cigarette I tried to light. My hands shook like crazy, and so did the rest of me. I smoked half a pack, waiting and praying for that thing to leave so I could too. A couple of hours later, I mustered the guts to bolt to my car. I drove home in a daze, eyes darting at every shadow, and didn't sleep a wink until dawn. I went back to the care home for my next shift, looking like a ghost. The police were there, questioning everyone about Parker's disappearance. I lied to them, couldn't possibly tell the truth, not when I didn't even know where that damn well was. I kept lying until they left me alone, until they packed up and drove off. Everyone else is over the moon that Parker's gone, and I stick out like a sore thumb among them. Sitting in his recliner, squirming as the sunset nears, I realize he was right on both counts. He was a selfish old bastard, and he left behind someone who misses him. I found a 4,600-year-old document describing a humanoid species named Sigil. I've been researching Mesopotamia my whole life. Ever since I was a preteen, I was captivated by that civilization. Unlike my friends and schoolmates, who were into typical kid stuff, I daydream about Sumerian kings along the Euphrates River. I grew up, went to college, and became a summer researcher. I'm not some big-shot historian, but I'm one of the best when it comes to translating Sumerian and Akkadian cuneiform, especially from around 2800 to 2500 BC. So when I was invited to translate some newly discovered tablets, I didn't expect much. I was thrilled personally, but I figured the contents would be pretty ordinary. My employer was a small private museum in Istanbul, one that specialized in artifacts from the Gilgamesh dynasty and prided itself on snagging these items from the British Museum. I was greeted at the airport by the owner's second assistant, a flamboyant and sharp-witted Arabic man named Zafar, who spoke English with almost no accent. "I've been assigned to accompany you during your stay, madam. Please let me know if you need anything," he said. Zafar was a pleasant guy, about my age, a sort of Turkish version of an English butler. He gave me space to work, but gently nudged me to eat at least 2 meals a day when I got too buried in my research. His presence boosted my productivity more than I'd expected. Still, No matter how great the experience was, I'm terrified of what I uncovered. Here's my translation of one of the tablets. We humans are being killed daily. The sigil are an inferior species in every way, but they have something we lack, something that should be a curse, yet somehow it's their greatest strength. They don't know when to give up. They surprised us with their persistence, and there are so many of them. The sigil have taken to breeding like rats or ants, and now they're as numerous as the stars in the sky. They've always had plenty of children, but most used to die from disease or predator attacks in their flimsy homes. That kept their numbers steady, unless they were warring among themselves, which happened constantly over basic resources like water. But now, some sigil, through sheer observation and trial and error, have learned our medicine and architecture. They've started to thrive and prosper too much. After invading and overpowering their fellow sigil from other tribes, a group reached our empire and slaughtered us. We struck back with our superior horses, better weapons, and stronger men, and we cut them down. But despite that, they never stopped. They're relentless. I wish I could understand why. We're taller, stronger, gifted with minds they'd think only a god could possess, and still they fight. Just because they learned to walk on two legs a while ago, they think they can rule the world, despite their puny reasoning and non-existent sciences. They don't even know how vast the world is. It's laughable. Like they're even more primitive ancestors, their lives are only worth something after they reproduce. Their children who die before mating age are useless and forgotten. That primitiveness is what infuriates me most about them. The sigil want all our secrets, our king. They want to be us. Tired of watching my sisters and daughters die, I'm ashamed to admit I was scared and went to the king. I urged him to strike a deal with the sigil. At first, he refused, but after so much of our blood was spilled and only a few hundred of us remained, our king, Shalmar, finally agreed to surrender to the inferior species so the rest of us could survive. We would retreat to our underground city and live safely for generations to come. The king would stay on the surface to rule them, to develop their society, and remain with them for exactly 4,560 years before we fiercely reclaim our world. Of course, they agreed. They don't even grasp how long that is. But it's not much time for us. We never die. We're simply reborn into new bodies with each generation, wiser, stronger, purer. We're moving to our fortress deep inside the earth by the end of the forthcoming Era Abduraru month. We'll make no mistakes this time. We'll keep the sigil under constant watch and learn all their secrets. Next time, we won't have any weaknesses. Just as they nearly did to us, we'll destroy them all without mercy. I was stunned to realize that we are the sigil. There's a far more advanced civilization living underground on this planet as you read this. Through chemical testing, the museum's expert dated the tablet with incredible precision, 4,600 years old. The Sumerian calendar is very similar to our Gregorian one. It has 12 months alternating between 29 and 30 days, following the moon's 29 and a half-day cycles. There's a 13th month, Era Abduraru, with 33 days, added every 3 years to adjust for the discrepancy. It wasn't hard for me to convert 4,560 Sumerian years into our calendar, using the tablet's age as year 0. I calculated that the real humans, with their superior minds and millennia-spanning hatred for us, are set to return and reclaim their land soon. How soon? According to my math, the 4,560th Sumerian year is next year. There's no such thing as Area 51. For years, I've been an avid reader of spooky stories online, but because of my job, I was never allowed to post anything myself, anywhere. Every now and then, an Area 51 tale would pop up. I used to work at Area 51, or I snuck into Area 51, that sort of thing. Those stories always made me itch to chime in, but I kept my mouth shut until now. Using a tangle of proxies and some tech wizardry, I think I'm safe to make this post. I won't bore you with the details. I'm spilling this on a creepy story site after years of lurking to clear up the myths and legends about the world's most infamous military base. I'm doing it now because even if I get caught, I've got a solid insurance policy. I'm seriously ill, not likely to recover, and I've got no family that could go after. There's nothing anyone can do to me. I think that there's no such thing as Area 51. Not really. The fact that it's the holy grail of conspiracy theories is exactly what the US government wants. I'm writing this in a rush, my thoughts all jumbled, so I'll just break it down like this. Groom Lake, Paradise Ranch, Edwards Air Force Extension, Restricted Training Facility, U-104. These are some names for what you might know as Area 51. I don't know much about its history, but it was originally set up by the U.S. Air Force as a secret weapons testing site during the Cold War. It had a few on-site extensions, one for developing experimental rocket and jet engines, another for training troops in nuclear warfare and post-apocalyptic survival, stuff like that. But much like the third Star Wars movie, the secret got out around the time of the Roswell incident. The media went wild, and the government tried to squash the rumors at first. Then they switched tactics, lean into the hype, and quietly move the real base a few dozen miles away. Today, Groom Lake, or Area 51, is just a small, functional military airport and base. It's got some bunkers, mostly storing low-security servers and a few munitions. They run tests there, and staff rotate in and out, mostly low-level folks trying to climb the ladder to the real facility. There are some outdated nuclear fallout shelters still maintained for storage. The place eats up a ton of power, and they go out of their way to make it look like a heavily guarded military base hiding some massive secret operation. Employees really do fly in daily from Las Vegas on those bland, unmarked Janet jets, sometimes called just another non-existent terminal, and they want you to notice. They want you to wonder where those jets are going, and they never want you to think twice about where they're coming from. The real Area 51, that's the juicy part. As far as I can tell from my limited, sneaky research, no one's ever spilled this secret before. It's locked down tight, and they don't just kill people who talk, they erase them from existence, sometimes entire families. Murder isn't even the right word. That's why the government freaks out when they learn an employee's terminal and has nothing to lose. It's why, if you work there, you only see their doctors, so they know your health status before you do. They want you to drop dead from a sudden heart attack before you can think about spilling their secrets to the world. Sometimes, they even trigger those heart attacks if they label you an HMT, health-motivated threat. But I didn't need a doctor to know I've got the same malignant tumor that killed my dad, glioblastoma multiforme. Every 3 months, we get a health check. Every 6, a CAT scan. I just didn't report the glaring symptoms this last time. I'll probably be gone before the next scan. I wanted to do this instead, maybe just to be the first. The only other thing I've ever done with my life is fix computers. The real secret military base is at McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas. The airport's history has always been tied to the military. Before and during World War II, the Army Corps of Engineers and the Air Force were building, storing, and training there. Basically, the government and its corporate buddies in the military-industrial complex took full control of the airport around the time Area 51, Groom Lake, blew up in the public eye. It was a quick, simple fix. On the surface, McCarran is just an airport, shuttling civilians around the world like any other. But what's happening underground is something else entirely. First, you've got to understand how this base works. Since it doubles as a public transportation hub, every part of it has a dual purpose. This is called masking, and they pull it off brilliantly at McCarran. A few examples. The constant roar of planes taking off and landing covers up cutting-edge engine tests. People hear the noise and shrug it off as normal airport chaos. Some jets even carry tech under testing, while others ferry hundreds of government workers dressed as vacationing civilians. At any given time, up to 6 gates at McCarran are packed with top-tier military and government employees, lounging on their iPhones, looking like college kids in pajamas or stressed-out businessmen. They're paid to play the part. The whole base is crawling with plainclothes soldiers, military police, tactical specialists, counterterrorism units, posing as cops, airport security, or desk staff. Their weapons are usually concealed sidearms, but the real firepower, like assault rifles and armor-piercing gear, is stashed around the public areas. It's easy to hide because no one's looking for it. They also hire plenty of regular civilians for TSA and other jobs. This is called mixing, and it's essential. What kind of airport never posts job openings? Ever watch the mechanics darting around the planes outside or see your luggage loaded up as you board? All that cargo movement hides the transport of special forces, lab equipment, military hardware, and exotic building materials. They'll roll by with a rig overflowing with luggage, and you don't even question what's in the 4 rigs behind it. They stage mix-ups and spills sometimes, and no one blinks. You're always exposed to some radiation when you fly. McCarran's why the safe exposure limit is set where it is. Excess radiation from weapons testing gets vented into the ground and out into the nearby desert. Having an airport to explain it keeps the nosy types with Geiger counters at bay. But the real genius of this top-secret base is the scale. It's built under an airport because it guzzles power way more than a normal one. So they stuck it in a city that already burns through a ridiculous amount of electricity, Las Vegas. The base hides in plain sight, even on the power grid. Area 51? Not so much, and that's on purpose. So if Area 51 is the decoy, what do we call the real one? It's got lots of names, but most call it the Nexus. It's an acronym, though hardly anyone knows what it stands for, not even me. Everything about the Nexus, from its operations to its layout, is compartmentalized. It's all need to know, and almost no one knows more than their tiny slice of the pie. You could work in an office there doing accounting and have no clue what the person next to you does, or the guy down the hall. They say even the president doesn't know the full picture, just a handful of generals and some CIA bigwigs. The culture there is nuts. It's like North Korea. Everyone's smiling, everyone's fine, and everyone's got a few rehearsed lines about their job when we're allowed to chat, which isn't often. Every phone's tapped, every room's got a camera, and no one knows who's watching or when. So you assume no one's telling the truth about anything, not even my office mate, Caliph. I wonder if any of us even know why we're there. People you've worked with for years will suddenly get reassigned or have a medical emergency and vanish. Ask around, and no one remembers them. No matter how many you asked out, I got hired straight out of college in my early 20s to do some programming for the Navy. Then I got sent to Groom Lake for server tests. They liked my IT and networking skills, so after a barrage of weird psych tests, piles of NDAs, and background checks, I was offered a job at a facility near Las Vegas proper. Here's the deal with that gig. A $1.5 million lump sum after taxes, plus $222,000 a year, housing, car, and medical all covered. But psychological breakdowns, anxiety attacks, serious health issues, or family problems void the contract. I signed about 2 new NDAs a week, most with under penalty of death tucked in somewhere. Employees can't leave the grounds for 5 years. We all live underground. The term is 5 years, then 4 in debriefing, where you live in Vegas but report to another facility 4 days a week. After that, you're discharged and watched for life. Your passport's toast. You can never leave the continental US. I heard 20% of ex-employees kill themselves. No idea if it's true, but if it is, I bet it's more like assisted suicide. The base is underground, a network of huge structures called hives that make up what's known as the colony or the Nexus. We crack a lot of Resident Evil jokes, by the way, but unlike the movie, the government doesn't bother with fake forests or digital cityscape windows to make us comfy. It's a dark, dreary, Soviet-style maze of halls and bunkers, complete with submarine vibes, watertight hatches, trapdoors, reinforced blast doors, you name it. The only exceptions are the office buildings where desk jockeys like me work. They look like any corporate office, except for the armed guards watching your every move 24/7, and the surreal, glowing labs dotting the lower levels of each hive. I've never been inside them, just passed by a few times. There are 4 hives, as far as I know, though I wouldn't be shocked if there were more. I work in Hive 1, running servers with a few other guys on 1 floor. Our hive has 16 floors, but we manage all the servers in Hive 1, so we move around a bit. I've skimmed some of the data passing through, and we're the dullest hive by far. Here's what I've pieced together from intercepted bits and coworker gossip. The Nexus has multiple networks, all decentralized, but they talk to each other sometimes. And that's how I've snagged some juicy info. Hive 1 handles finance, accounting, operations, troop training, housing, and small-scale weapons testing. Hive 2 is chemical engineering, some nanotech research, and advanced psychological fitness, whatever that means. For elite military, probably black ops. Stuff like surviving 30 years in a Siberian prison, I'd guess. I think the top brass live and meet there too. Hive 3's upper levels are bioweapons and disease research. Zombies would be here if the government's got them. I've held back so many damn zombie jokes over the years, but I never know who's a snitch. The lower levels are advanced space travel and warfare tech, particle engines, gravitational beams, sci-fi stuff. I once saw an email full of coded jargon marked A, which folks think means astrobiology, alien life. Maybe it's just microbes or fossilized plants from a meteor, or maybe it's something way bigger. No hard proof, but there's a reason it's not with the biologists upstairs. Hive 4 is a total blackout. The encryption, firewalls, and security there are unlike anything I've seen, even on top secret Navy projects. There's a whisper that the most terrifying thing in the world is on floor 15. A few odd things about Hive 4. The top brass don't have clearance to enter. They access it via video feed in their meeting rooms, and materials get shipped from 4 to 2 for physical review. No idea why they won't go in. Maybe it's too dangerous. A few years back, when I started, a guy from Hive 4 triggered the only Nexus-wide lockdown I've seen. He was being escorted through Hive 1 by thumpers, what we call the black-booted squads that control Hive access, and started screaming about IDAs. I didn't hear it myself, but I heard the gunshot while eating lunch. They put a bullet in his head before he could finish. IDAs are interdimensional anomalies. That's all I know about that. Then there's the twins. I don't know who or what they are, but they're the crown jewel of Hive 4, above top secret. Even emailing about them on secure networks is treason unless you're one of the 4 cleared employees. I've only caught scraps. A medical record with no vitals, weird vocalizations that cause hallucinations and psychosis in nearby staff, and skin that triggers violent nausea when touched, like an Australian stinging tree or jellyfish. I read about people who've dealt with them. One woman got sent to the psych ward after being in the same room as them. A soldier guarding their lab peeked inside during a routine access, then bashed his own brains out with his pistol, but while singing an Irish folk song. The woman's case was stranger. During breakfast with a colleague, she grabbed a fork, walked out of the mess hall, stripped naked, blinded herself in both eyes, and somehow made it up to floor 1, where the Hive 3 access corridor is, navigating keycard readers, passcode boxes, and retinal scanners. How she did it is still under review. The last email about her, from 2012, said she's in solitary on floor 11, smiling blissfully in the dark that a co-worker I trust, Varen, claimed he saw the twins once through a hacked video feed. He said they're woman-like, twice as tall as a grown man, with thick, unidentifiable black growths hanging from their heads like hair. They float a few inches off the ground, dragging their toes lightly as they move, and they're deathly pale. He never saw their faces, but he swears they distort reality, or at least the feed, so space looks warped around them. Maybe they're the IDAs that guy was yelling about, but that's all I've got for now. I hope the world learns the truth someday about what's down here. We're basically prisoners, limited, supervised internet access and all. If you don't hear from me again, assume they figured me out.